Welcome to another episode of Parenting Not What You Thought podcast, where we delve into the depths of parenting in ways that you might never have thought of before. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hello, Eliav Friedman. It's so nice to finally connect with you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Thank you. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, very good. So thank you for agreeing to come on. And before we get started, just let me hear a little bit about you first. In your professional life, who is your typical clientele? What do you specialize in a little bit? That kind of thing.
Okay, sure. So first of all, I have a BA with a major in psychology from what's now Lander University in Queens. They're feeling very, very proud of them. They finally made university status. Then I have a master's in social work from Wurzweiler, which is a YU School of Social Work. I finished my master's 18 plus years ago. The camera's probably picking up that this is not, this is already getting a little bit snowy and not as young as I once was. I primarily work with teens. That is more than anyone. Teens, their parents. As I'm getting older, some adults are also coming to me as I'm adding to my toolbox. But that's really what drove me into the field more than anything, was to be working with young people who are struggling, who are trying to find themselves. Really, really what I wanted to do was work with kids at risk. That was like my dream. Teens that are struggling. That was the population that I always dreamt of working with primarily. I spent, after I've been in Eretz Yisrael now, shortly after I got my master's, my wife and I returned to Eretz Yisrael. And my goal was, okay, I'm just going to work with kids that are struggling. And I spent 7 years, in fact, working for a local organization here in Beit Shemesh, working with kids in the streets, in the parks, running programs for them, having them in my house, building relationships with Misrad Revacha, which is roughly social services, welfare services, working with the police, etc., and really getting a lot of experience. And it's already about 13 or 14 years ago that I opened a private practice, and working with teens. It wasn't necessarily something I was looking for, but it happened to be that I think, responsible professionals try to make sure that they have good supervision. I ended up being supervised for a while by a woman here in the neighborhood. Her name is Halise Pollack. She actually worked in one neighborhood or two neighborhoods over. Her specialty is working with trauma, in particular abuse, sexual abuse. I can use that kind of terminology. People will be comfortable with that. It's okay. So she would ultimately teach me. I didn't do a formal training, but she would teach me how to work with victims of abuse. And then there was a training being offered in working with youth and adolescent perpetrators of sexual abuse. And I wouldn't say she forced me, she all but forced me to take that training, which I did. And she told me, she said, this is really a tremendous need. It's going to make you busy. And I wish that was not the case. But unfortunately, it seems like she was correct. I would say that probably at this point, around a third of the clients I'm working with are of that ilk. I finished that course about 8 or so years ago, and I've gotten busy with it. I've written an article or two about it. Unfortunately, it's a major issue. I also touch upon addiction issues, a lot of anything related to that area. There's Arias and there's Abizraya. So I'm kind of busy with all these kind of things. I had a conversation recently with another very talented therapist who lives in Yerushalayim, and she said to me, she's like, you really deal with like some of the darkest things that exist in our community. And I said, it could be, but what we're trying to do is shed some light over there and bring light to those places. Baruch Hashem, we've had a lot of siyata d'shmaya.
Okay, that's beautiful. So you said about a third of your clients are
in that area of abuse, of sexual abuse. Again,
they were abused.
So I work much more with the abusers than those who were abused.
So you're saying about 2/3 are the abusers and a third are the abused?
No. I'm saying about a third of my total caseload. I have.
Is in this area? I got you.
Yeah, to do this only this all day would, even for me, would
Would
be
just kill you, right?
it's a
Right.
lot. These cases are hard. They can be hard. They can be taxing. Not always. There's a lot to be said about this topic
So
in
let's zero
particular.
in. Right. So you're dealing with the children after things have already happened, and I want to focus much more on the prevention. So,
It's a great idea.
in order to get there, let's first start with this. Do you see a typical profile? Let's say I'm not even talking necessarily natures like quieter, louder, more subservient, more aggressive. Not even talking necessarily so much about that. But let's say I'm talking more a child with lower self-esteem or higher self-esteem, or somebody that had to, doesn't have such a good social standing, or things like
Right.
that. Do you typically see certain criteria that will identify for you on both ends, on someone who would be and abused, Rahman al or someone who would be the abuser, Rahman al? And I want to point out over here, before you even answer the question, that I think it's tremendous the work that you do. We use these terms, abused and abuser, and I think you pointed this out in the past, that a teenager who's doing things with a kid a few years younger than him, it's a little bit hard to call them an abuser or a pedophile. Rather, they're more like exploring their sexuality, or I don't remember exactly how you put it, but there's definitely, of course, it's something terrible and it's something that needs to be stopped. But if we can help the child rather than just call them a criminal and brand them for life, we've done a tremendous service. I don't think anybody will disagree with that. So I want to
Right.
applaud you for that.
Thank you. I will say, just to touch on that point, because it is an important thing for people to realize. There is a huge difference between a 15 or even an 18-year-old, or possibly even a 20-year-old who's doing something like this, other than as opposed to a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old. When we're talking about, like, most people assume that if somebody is abusing others, they must have been abused themselves. The research that I've seen does not support the notion that in order to sexually abuse others, one must have been sexually abused. But my experience on the research does show that they've definitely been hurt in some way, meaning they're acting from a place of pain, from a place of confusion, much more than from a place of they took advantage of somebody. But it's not their MO. That's the biggest difference between a young person who's done this and an adult, is how much has this been integrated into who they are and the way that they operate, and generally speaking. And being able to appreciate that makes a huge difference. The research shows that, to the best of our ability to ascertain this, the success rates that we have with young people who have behaved in such a way, in 85 to 90% of cases, if they've gotten good, if they're in therapy, they will not go back and do this again. That is, find a therapy in the world which is that successful. It's essentially impossible, because if we catch
Wow.
them in time, and again, obviously it depends on the case, and depends on how bad it was and how many people it was and how injured they are. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? There's a lot, everyone has their experiences, and it's hard to pin things down 100%. Baruch Hashem, I've had a lot of success working with these young men, and the way that I measure how successful I've been is, can I be confident that it's less likely he will do it again than that someone else will do it for the first time? That's what I'm trying to get to, and most of the time, not always, but most of the time, we're able to get to that. It takes time; it's a lot of work.
Wow.
Now, what I've seen, to go to your original question, what I've seen that's so powerful. It was so powerful to me. I kind of had this hunch, and I'm like, okay, a hunch is not science. A hunch is, it's like, it's wonderful. But I also had a hunch that I needed to eat a cookie, and I did, and it was yummy, but it wasn't good for me. I have that hunch too often, unfortunately. But the hunch that I had, which is more relevant, is that this is a lot more to do with connection, with where they're holding emotionally, than anything else. And what I have found is that with most of my clients who have hurt others, and like you said, I don't like using the word perpetrator. I don't like using the word offender. It's hard to communicate without
Right.
using those terms, but I don't feel that they've really earned those terms, those titles in most cases. The young men who have hurt others, most of the time, are really lacking in emotional connection. I was thinking about this conversation that we were going to have. So my mind works very associatively, and just random thoughts will pop into my head, and sometimes they're even good thoughts. And one of the thoughts that I thought was a good one was, there's a famous idea by Egla Arufa that so we know that the Zkanim go out, right, and they say, "Yadinu li shafchuas adam hazeh ve'ininu li ra'u." So Rashi brings the Gemara that asks, like, what anybody thought that the Zkanim, that the people sitting on Beis Din were the ones that killed this person? So the Rashi brings, the Gemara says no, but that they're saying that they didn't leave him without achila, without levia, that they made sure that they. So the question is, and I believe it's Rabbi Yerucham who asked this question and gives this answer. I believe that's who it was. It might be Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, but I think it's Rabbi Yerucham. Says, with all due respect, how does that help? What difference does it make? The guy was walking out in a desert, or he was walking out in a mountain range. He was out in the middle. He was in the wilderness. He wasn't near a city. And some bandits, he happened upon, Alibaba and his 40 thieves, and they did what they do. They robbed him and they killed him. How would it have helped if Beis Din had been malava him, half a mile into, what difference would it make? And the answer that he gives is that a person who has backing, who has people, who's loved, who's cared for, is not a victim. A person who has that confidence because he knows that there are people that are waiting for him or that are caring about him, whatever it is, it makes a huge difference. My wife and I have a rule in our house. We try very hard as more and more of our children get older and enough older that it just becomes more challenging. But we instituted a rule that one of us waits up for the kids. We don't both go to bed. Sometimes it's both of us, but as it gets later, there's no reason, do we both have to be sleep deprived? We try to make sure that one of us waits up for whoever's going to be out. Whether we're waiting for a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old. That's, that my daughter who's married, that was like, every time she came home, up to the night of her wedding, there was somebody up waiting for her.
Wow.
I think almost every night.
That's beautiful.
It's not always easy, but one of the reasons we do it is because of this idea, is because when a child knows that there's somebody waiting for them, they're in a different place emotionally than if they're coming home to a house with sleeping parents.
Right. So basically what you're saying is that when the parents have a strong connection with the child, so that is what matters most to help the child not become a victim. And
both ends. Both ends. Now again, we can talk for hours about how to foster a great relationship. What are we going to do? And it's something which, to some extent, it does shift as children get older. But if we're talking to parents of small children, I just literally right before we got on this, I was looking at something and I saw this video where a bunch of parents were asked, if they could have dinner with any person in the world or in history, who would they want to have dinner with? And everybody gave whatever answers they gave. And they were being recorded. They knew they were being videoed as they did this. And then all their children were asked the same question. And almost all of the children answered, like, can it be family? Like, can it be my parents? Almost all of the kids said if they had a choice of who to have dinner with, it would be their parents. Wow. And that's true whether we're talking about Yiddish Kinder or we're talking about Goyim. It's all the same thing.
Right.
Children are born, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky speaks about this in a number of places. Children are born with an inherent desire to please their parents. That's what they want.
So you're saying that would help the boy also, or the child also, who would become what we call the abuser as well, because he's not looking for a different connection.
That's pretty much what I'm saying. Now, again, we're not laying any blame at anybody's feet, and everybody has their reasons. And there's no one ingredient. There's no one ingredient. It's always going to be part of the challenge in working with these young men is figuring out how many different ingredients were involved and which ones really played that role, etc. But what I found with many of them, so many of them were lacking proper education in this area. That's true. Many of them were exposed to things that they shouldn't have been exposed to. That's true. But what I have found, I think as often as anything else, and maybe more, is how connected are they? How do they have healthy connections? Are they healthily connected to their parents? Are they healthily connected to their siblings? Are they healthily connected to mechanchem? Are they healthily connected to their friends? Which is why it's not a coincidence. It's known that kids with attention deficit, for example, it's considered to be a potential warnings. It's a potential risk factor. Now, I don't think it's because it's an essential risk factor. I think it's because kids with attention deficit are more likely to struggle in school. They're more likely to struggle in relationships. They're more likely to have lots of adults in their life who are frustrated with them and have a hard time being patient with them. So they
Right.
feel disconnected. One of the things
Right.
that we have to stress, I think, as much as possible, is that the only people who can tell us how good our relationship with our children is our children.
In a bunch of years.
Now, again, if your child has never said to you, "I hate you," then like I'm so jealous. You know what I'm saying? Like that
Right.
can
Of course.
happen. Our
Of
kids are
course.
exposed.
So
My son said something. My 9-year-old said a word on Shabbos that I was like, "Where did you learn that?" Kids hear words and they say them, and that will happen. That's saying that's a normal thing.
right.
But if our children are still coming to us for that hug at night, if they're still, when something's bothering them, they're coming to speak with us, they're going to do that when they're 2, when they're 3, when they're 4, when they're 5. They're for sure doing that. If they're
Right.
not, if they're already at 6 or 7, they're not doing it. Then some. Again, there's some children who are more verbal than others. That's for sure true.
Right.
But normally, a kid's going to be doing these things. The question is, are we listening? Are we giving them a sense that it's safe to come and talk to us?
Okay, so 1 second. Take things step by step because you've said a lot here, and I want to break it down a little bit.
Please.
This is great. So you're focusing a lot on the connection. It happens to be that in my parent coaching, now again, your expertise is something that I am not completely, but almost completely clueless about. When I work
I'm
with
so
boys,
jealous.
like in the morning, I work with boys in school. If it comes up and that a kid was in any way sexually, whatever, I'm giving up that kid. Let him go work with someone that has expertise in that area. Has happened. That's not my area. I don't know this at all.
Sure.
However, this thing of connection is something that I focus a lot in my parent coaching. I have a whole section that's called Love, Connection, Love. And the point of it is mostly to bring out how a parent's love is more or less natural. It is natural, and we need to just not smother it, like not look at our kids through a behavioral lens. We end up smothering it. And what you need to put a tremendous focus on is building and maintaining a connection. And we go through the different stages of a child, how to do that. Now, I learned this from Mendel Slamowitz. He's a big mechanech and a Rosh Shiva here in Lakewood. When one of my children was born, he told me, I want to tell you something. The most important thing, and he gave me permission to say this in public in his name, is that the most important thing is the connection you have with your child. When I teach it to parents, I told them this is the most important thing. And also this will help you in the future be able to tell your child different things that are difficult for them to hear, and they won't be running away from you. You're teaching us that goes a lot further than that. This is actually a tremendous, tremendous part of keeping our children safe. And that's something that every parent wants to know. What can I do to help keep my child safe? I can't bubble wrap them, and I shouldn't bubble wrap them.
Right.
And what can I do to help keep my child safe? In this world, especially nowadays, we hear all the stories, we know everything that goes on, and it makes us concerned. So this is a tremendous point. Now,
Just on that
I had
point.
another question here, and this goes into what you started talking about, but let's take it on a step by step basis.
Mhm.
Um, and this has to do with connection, but it's another layer of it. So you had posted once on LinkedIn that do your children feel comfortable talking to you? And you started mentioning that now. And you wrote, I don't mean do they just, feel comfortable asking you for supper, or I don't know if you wrote this, but demanding supper, but do they feel comfortable telling you about hard things? So obviously your point over here is that a child should feel comfortable telling his parent anything, even something that will get the parent not happy with what the child did, because that leaves the
Exactly.
avenues of communication open so that if chas v'shalom there's something serious that needs to be said, the child will feel comfortable giving that over to the parent, and therefore it can be dealt with much earlier, and you can end up avoiding a lot of problems. I actually have a friend that told me that his son was about 12 or 13 years old, and a different child taught him some things he shouldn't have known and helped to showed him how to do different stuff. And he said that his son came to him and told him everything that happened, every single
Wow.
thing. And he said, am I going to be able to learn again? Am I going to be able to everything? And he told me that I don't know why I was zoicha, but my son tells me everything. I mean, I do know why, because I never shut him down. But my son tells me everything. Here's what I want to ask you. Here's my question. My question is obviously, I mean, I just brought out, I think, a lot of what you wanted to say is that when you don't shut down the communications and you leave those avenues open, you foster a very, very trusting environment in which he's able to talk to you. Now, my question is, there are many different personality types, and you, I give you an example. I was talking with someone today, happens to be a social worker, a friend of mine. You know, we very often schmooze about all these different kind of things. And I was telling him that, when I hear these stories about someone, you know, committed suicide or did something else, or whatever, and they say if only one person would have smiled at me, I wouldn't have done it. Now, I have a hard time with these things because I've seen very, very often where you'll have children that will say, nobody's nice to me, everyone hates me, and that's what, da, 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 da. And I know I've been, I'm on all sides of these things. And I know that there are people that are bending themselves over backwards to help this person, to be nice to them, to smile at them, to show them a good word. And there are different personality types, and there are perspective taking things where a person, and I've seen this with adults also, that they have a hard time seeing the whole picture, right? And they're caught up in their moment, and they create sort of an alternative reality in their mind, which in that case we have a very hard time saying that it's really in other words, the child or the person might truly feel that no one smiled at them and no one opened up that avenue, but the reality is not that way. Is it? Do you ever come across such a thing?
Sure, sure,
So my
sure, sure.
question really is then, how do in such kind of children, in a child that's very straightforward, you smile at him, you leave the avenues open, we know what to do, right? We know more or less what to do. We don't shut him down, he can communicate with us. We'll get back to that in one moment. But now the bigger question is a child that doesn't necessarily have straightforward thinking, which you had mentioned before, that very often children that have more complicated types will be more prone to have problems. How do we leave areas of communication open with them if they build alternative realities in their mind?
You,
A
you
pretty
didn't want
loaded
to
question.
you didn't want to make this easy for me. I see. That's a great question. That's a great question. There's no listen. I saw a quote once. I wish I could remember who it was that said it. I don't remember exactly. But what he said was that if they can't learn the way that we teach, we had better learn how to teach in the way that they learn. And the bottom line is that if there was ever a time in the history of the world that we're capable of understanding what's going on with our kid, I mean, it could be people even do it too much, but there's every diagnosis that could possibly exist. We're aware of it, and we've got every type of paraprofessional and professional with every type of tiny little expertise in every single area. It's like you asked me, what's my expertise? I mean, I work with teens of all types. If the kids between the age of 14 and 24, send them to me, other than very few areas that I don't work with. And it happens to be one of the areas I don't work with is people that are on the spectrum. I find a lot of my work is via connection and really clicking with somebody, and I find it difficult to do that, which makes sense. But if one has a child like that, I have a daughter who has Down syndrome, so we're finding a way, and she's only a year and a half old, so it's not such an issue right now. But yeah, we have to find out how to communicate with the child. If you have a child with Down syndrome, you have to find out how to communicate with them and the best ways to possibly keep them safe. If you have a child who's on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, you're going to have to find that way. And those are obviously very extreme examples. And I think that the answer is that, first of all, to understand what it means to not shut a kid down is to be listening as much as possible and really understanding their world and really appreciating where they're coming from. That's number one. Meaning, I've posted this many times on LinkedIn. I imagine you've seen it also. If you want to know how well a conversation went with a child, certainly with a teen, but really with any child, check the percentage. How much did each person speak? The higher percentage of the time the child was speaking, the more successful the conversation was. And the reason is
Yeah,
because
so
of
that from you.
what you just quoted. Because more important than anything that I want to teach my child, more important than anything, any lesson I want to get across to them, is the message, I care about you, you're important to me.
Well,
There's literally nothing more important than that. I believe in you, you're important to me, you matter. I'm learning a whole new modality in therapy now. I'm learning IFS. You might have seen those posts also. And almost everything that we're dealing with people are these wounds that people have deep inside themselves from when they were children. And
Right.
most of the time, we're not talking about that they were attacked by some evil, vile fiend who was out to hurt the children of the world. It's usually the people that care most about them who are inadvertently sending messages that they would never want their child to get. Because we're human and we make mistakes and we all have our own challenges and we have our emotional stuff that we're dealing with. And I know a particular Rav in my community who likes to say, when you really look at it, it's all Hitler's fault. Somehow it goes, Klal Yisrael is a very traumatized nation. I don't mean that in any way to be mezalzel, and I don't mean that to be negative in any way. Go back to Mitzrayim. It's been a rough few millennia.
Right.
There's been a lot of challenges. There's been a lot of pain. There's been a lot of trauma. There's not a better word for it. So we all have the stuff that we're carrying. I hope nobody takes this the wrong way. One of the greatest gifts that a person can give their child is to go to therapy themselves. If you don't need it, then that's amazing. I'm so happy for you. Really, really, genuinely, I am. And there are people who don't need it. But if you have a tzad that maybe you do, don't do it for yourself. Don't even do it for your spouse. Do it for your kids.
Right.
It's the best gift that you can give them. And I've seen it in my own life. I've gone. I'll probably go back because I want to be the best husband that I can be. I want to be the best father that I can be. I want to be the best therapist that I can be. I want to be the best friend that I can be, the best son, the best brother. I want that. I want it for myself and I want it for them. And I want to feel, etc. So with these kids that to try to more directly respond to your question, we have to know our children well enough to know what we're going to do to create safety for them. And if we're not able to do that, Baruch Hashem, there's a plethora of people. I have one of my Rebbeim who's been very involved in working with all sorts of struggling people over the course of his life, has a son who reached a very, very, very scary place. I'll just say it straight. He has a son who OD'd. He was literally dead on the table. And the doctors, EMTs, did Tchias HaMesim, like Baruch Hashem. He's a married guy now. He's doing well. He's Beseder. But at one point I said, Rebbe, if it could happen to you, then what hope do the rest of us have? He said, you guys are going to raise families with 1,000 times more resources than we even knew could possibly exist when I was raising my kids. That's what my Rebbe said. And it's true. And as much as it was true when I started raising my children over 20 years ago, it's Kal v'chomer, it's true today. Right. So please don't drive your kids crazy and don't immediately rush to give them every type of therapy that there possibly can be. My most difficult clients are the ones that have been in therapy already for 10 years by the time they get to me at the age of 14. They're burnt out. They're tired of being blamed for being the issue, etc. The first step should always be, what can I as a parent learn to help my child more? What guidance can I get? What can I learn about myself, about parenting, about kids, about child development? There's really a lot out there. There's no Torah in the Goyim, but there's a lot of Chachma in the Goyim.
Right.
And there's a lot of people in our community who have taken that Chachma and adapted it to really fit our community.
Right. So to summarize, basically you're saying that even the child that has a different point of view, has a hard time with perspective taking and seeing the full picture, and we need to figure out what's going on in that child's world and how to reach them. And either you can do that through listening and through trying to understand them, or if you don't, you can always get help, and the help can be in the form of a good therapist. The help can be in the form of a Rav. The help can be in the form of someone who knows what they're doing and is able to guide you and actually has time and to guide you to help your child. Let me ask you a different question now, and that's great.
I'm going to throw you one last point on that, just as something. It's just good to know that every once in a while, my wife and I will look at one of our children and say, act your age. Oh, wait, you are. It's so important to know. If you don't know if what your kid is doing is normal, ask their Rebbe, ask their Mora. That's a person who's literally with that age child all day long.
Excellent. You should know this is something that I do. This whole parent coaching is specifically for this. It's for younger parents that don't necessarily know what people 10 years older than them learn through experience. And
Right.
sometimes, because we lack that knowledge, like you said, we expect from them things that we shouldn't be expecting from them because we're thinking of them as older than they are. And one of the pieces of advice that I give them is that now that we did this, and you know to step back and think, maybe I have the wrong thought over here, and you're really not sure. Is someone older than you, is someone that already went through this, just is someone that had that experience, because you know to step back and think. That's great. No, it's. I see it like it transforms people's homes completely, like turns them around in a 360 in a way that they thought that their world is crashing down, and the kid needs who knows how much help, and through
Right.
this shifting of mindset, it completely turns it around.
It's very
Um,
interesting how every young mother, when their child has a fever, immediately calls, her mother, what do I do? And then when their child is like acting out or doing something, they're like, I don't know. Does my mother really know? What is the trigger really? What experience does she have? Now, not
right,
every mother and not every trigger necessarily is an expert in child development, but you can get perspective.
right.
As the parents and as the in-laws, what we need to learn to, and when we're the older ones, we need to learn how to not give the advice until it's asked for, so that then maybe we'll actually ask for it. But
Right.
but yeah, that's
That's a
there's
great point. That's an excellent
so much.
point. Let me ask you another question here about
Please.
communication and your child being open with you. I asked you the hard question first, right? A child that has a hard time, they have a hard time with perspective taking, and it's hard for you to leave those lines of communications open just because they don't get that you actually are. Now, what about a regular quote unquote child, right, who has a much easier time, and you know just not to knock them down, and then you'll leave those lines open? This is a question that parents will be struggling with: is what about when they do something wrong? Should I never ever tell them that they're doing anything wrong because they're going to feel knocked down? I'm not going to leave those lines of communication open. So obviously, I talk about this in my thing. Let's hear what you say.
Right. Again, an excellent question. I, I'm often reminded. I told a full version of the story recently, but to one of my clients, I shared some of my less proud moments. But I had a friend in high school whose parents only had one rule. They only had one rule: you're not allowed to lie. No sheker, you can't lie. If you tell us what happened, if you tell us the truth, you will not get in trouble. You will not be punished. And now they took it to an extreme, but their children, to the best of my knowledge, I know that my friend was literally incapable of lying. He could not do it, even though we all got in trouble because of it. He could not tell a lie. If our children are afraid to talk to us because they're afraid of our reaction, they're afraid of the consequences of speaking to us, that's where we really run into trouble. That's where it gets really tricky. So, of course, there's place to educate our children. Of course, there's place to educate. Of course, how are they supposed to know what's right and wrong if we don't tell them? Now, it happens to be that they know a lot more than we think they know. First of all, just the fact that unless your kid is homeschooled, they're getting a tremendous amount. They're in cheder, they're in school, they're in Beis
Right
Yaakov, wherever
environment,
they are,
right?
because as whatever we're going to do with our children 1-on-1 or 1-on-5 or 1-on-10, whatever it might be, when you're running a classroom where there's 20, halavai 25, you know what I'm saying? There's 25 or 30 or 35 students, whatever it is. There have
Right.
to be rules, and those rules have to be enforced. So our kids do know a lot. There's no group of young people in the world who have as much information in their head as the average Jewish child. It's absolutely unbelievable. I had a very cool experience. Once upon a time, we had I wouldn't even call them Bali Tshuva, potential Bali Tshuva at our house on Shabbos. Happened to be that my brother-in-law, my wife's youngest brother, was also with us for Shabbos. And one of the guests was a very curious guy, like a university student, very intelligent, very curious guy. And he decided he wanted to fully immerse himself, and we did Kiddush, and he washed his hands, and I made the bracha with him. I was feeling all like cool, kirabai, whatever. And then he asks me, after not talking until he ate his challah, he asked me why the salt. It took me an hour and a half to answer his question. Because
Wow.
if I'm going to tell him there's a medrash, he has no idea what a medrash is.
Right. He needs everything. And
So
your
I
kid has to
mamish
be there the next
ordered.
5 minutes.
Yeah, it's very simple. But my
Right.
brother-in-law told me afterwards, he's like, it's unbelievable. There's nothing I said that all my children knew everything I said. You know what I'm saying? Like my 10-year-old sitting at the table, my 6-year-old sitting at the table knew almost every single thing that I said. It's an unbelievable amount of information that we're holding and we don't even realize that we're holding. So first of all, we
Right.
have to appreciate that our kids know a lot. They have a challenge. Their challenge is that they're human beings and that human beings struggle. There's the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara. They don't even have a Yetzer Tov, right? It's hard. Developing good habits is hard. I don't always do what I'm supposed to do. Why would I expect my 8-year-old to always do what he's supposed to do? So that's number one. Number two is if you want to teach, in my opinion, if you want to teach, you have to try to set up to the extent possible the optimal scenario for learning. People don't learn well when they feel bad about themselves. People don't learn well when they feel attacked. People don't feel well, to put it simply, when they don't feel safe. Listen, I'm not perfect. I react sometimes. I remember there was one time one of my children was playing, threatened his brother with a knife. Now it wasn't a sharp knife. You know what I'm saying? Like it wasn't, it was like, and I did not react well. I'm not proud. I did not react well. And I said, "Don't you know that if you do such a thing, the knife becomes treif?" And he looks at me. He goes, "No." Oh, you're saying like that happens to be a random halacha that if it's like a real threat with a knife, you have to. Why would he know that? He was 10. Like, but will he remember it based on that interaction? It's possible he'll remember it, but he won't want to remember because nobody wants to know what they learned by it being drilled into them in a negative way. So
Good
I
point.
find a much more effective way. There's a famous concept that's used when you're having a debate with somebody. It's called the straw man. The straw man is, I'm not going to talk about what you did wrong. I'll come up with a scenario that has nothing to do with you, and I'm going to use a fictional figure where they call the straw man, and then we'll talk about what that guy did right or did wrong, or what he could have done right or he could have done wrong, etc. So if your child is doing something and you want them to know about it, so first of all, you could check with their Mora, Rebbe, teacher, or whatever term you want, and just ask: is it something that is being addressed? Is it something that could be addressed? Are you seeing other kids also struggling with this? That's something that could be a very good idea. Find an opportunity. Yeah, if you're a little bit creative, you can tie. Believe me, watch Rabbanim at a Shalom Zachar or at a Bar Mitzvah. They somehow tie every single parsha to the birth of a child, to the chinuch of a child, to a Bar Mitzvah. Get a little bit creative. Become like a darshan. Right? In any parsha, you can find pretty much the message that you need your child to hear. And I'll tell you what also, I think the pressure that a lot of us have is that we want to have perfect children. I've told many parents in my office, and I believe it very, very firmly to be true. You can have a perfect 15-year-old, but then you'll have no nachas from him when he's 25 or 35. Or you can have a normal, healthy 15-year-old who's having whatever struggles a normal, healthy 15-year-old has, and then you can have tremendous nachas when he's 25 and 35 and 45.
100%.
So take your time. They don't need to know everything today. Again, there's some things that are more urgent. There are some things that you need to really get a message across. That's true. I personally think if you've created a backdrop of love and trust, there was a young man. I was running a program for kids at risk 15 plus years ago. And there was a young man who had joined the program. The guys would usually come to my house on Friday night. We had Einig Shabbos, whatever. And then guys would go out, and there was a guy who worked with me who would go out with them. And one time he comes back to me, and he knocks on my door again. It's like 11-something at night. I don't know. It's late already. And he's like, I'm having a problem with so-and-so. Well, let's call him Ephraim. His name was not Ephraim. Yeah, I'm having a problem with Ephraim. I don't know what's going on. Put on a raincoat. But we go out. We find him. I'm trying to talk to him. The kid is insistent. I'm standing under an awning because it's pouring. He insists on standing in the rain. I was out with him. I got back to my house at 2:30 in the morning on a Friday night.
Wow.
When I opened the door, my wife comes rushing towards the door. She's like, "Where?" Like she had no idea I left the house. She was sleeping before I left. Where were you? I said, "I'm really sorry. It was an emergency. I'm not alone. We'll talk about it in the morning. Go back to sleep. I'm safe." And I brought the kid into my house. By that time, it had stopped raining, and the kid was literally half my size. I managed to find some kind of clothing that he could be somewhat dry when he walked home. And that's when I knew I had him. When I had suffered for him, when I had given him my night's sleep and given him my shalom bayis, that's when I knew that I could give him Musar.
Well,
If my children feel safe with me, if I can be confident that they know I love them, it's a beautiful story with Eliav Friedman, that he would sit by the
I think we're going
entrance.
to end with this because I think we could talk for hours and hours, and this is a great topic. But at some point in time we have to finish it. So let's hear the story, and we're going to end with that.
Okay, Beseder. So he would sit by the entrance to the Beis Medrash during Shachris, and boys that would come after Yishtabach, there was whatever consequence there was to coming late. I don't remember exactly what the consequence was. And there was a boy who had been late once or twice and was not interested in suffering the consequences anymore, but he was late. So he climbed through the window in the front of the Beis Medrash so he wouldn't get caught coming in late. He didn't chap who Rebellia was, because when he was walking out, Rebellia said to him, he said, I didn't see you walk into the Beis Medrash. When did you get here? Hemming and hawing until finally the boy admitted what had happened. He had come late. He didn't want to get caught. And he had climbed through a window. Rebellia turned red. Ramos, you're resorting to trickery and to lying. You're lying to me. If you knew how much I loved you, I would smack you. If you knew how much I love you, I would smack you.
Wow.
So I think it's very important. We have to sometimes tell our kids what they're doing wrong because sometimes they won't know otherwise.
Right.
But it's in a way which is safe, in a way that they can hear as much as possible. Sometimes if one kid is sitting, pummeling the other one, get in the way. You know what I'm saying? Like, do what you have to do. but if we have to give it to them in a way that they once we know that they know how much we love them, and we reinforce immediately afterwards how much we love them.
Just to summarize what you said, somebody that I knew a bunch of years ago, and he would give his kids a patch here and there, but he was very makbid. He insisted that whichever parent gave the kid a patch had to then pick up the child and hold them and kiss them and comfort them from the pain of the patch, because it was given with a reason. And his kids are great kids now. I mean, they're married already and everything's going back a long time ago. But just to summarize, basically what comes out of this is connection. And when you have that connection, and that connection is built, and then you're able to give that discipline over in a good way because the child feels with you. Your love is able to go out to them, and they feel it, and they feel connected to you. And a child is more difficult to connect to. We need to find ways and learn ways how to connect with them. Thank you so much, Eliav Friedman, for coming on and sharing your invaluable wisdom with us. And I hope that this will be a tremendous help to many parents in Mitzvah Hashem. Obviously, the main thing always is to daven and to try your best.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Parenting Not What You Thought podcast. I truly hope that this episode has been beneficial for you in your parenting. Please let me know either in the comments or by sending me an email at Boruch, that's BORUCH, at bmaparenting.com. Have a wonderful day.